Well, Joe, welcome to Dublin. First of all, I'm used to wearing a suit at tech events, but what's going on with you here?
I thought I should be stylish if I'm in Europe now that I'm an investor, you know.
So, as you say, you've gone from being an entrepreneur in the classic sense to being an investor. You've raised one venture capital fund. You're reportedly raising another one. Give us a sense of how you're thinking about where the opportunities is evolving. So where were you 3 years ago? Where are you today? Where do you think you're going to be excited by the opportunities in about 3 years' time?
So I think the thing that's changed a lot in the last 5 years is you see a lot more people in our space solving problems that matter to the really big industries. I think if you go back in time 5 years, if I went to New York or to London, I'd meet with the tech guys in the basement of the big companies, and now you're meeting with the CEOs because the people running these industries, they realize that technology is really changing how everything works. And
so, when you say the big industries, which ones do you think are ripe for disruption at the moment, and which companies are exciting you in what they're doing?
Sure. Well, of course, Palantir, we started it in government and finance, and it's really moved into healthcare and energy, and I think you're seeing a lot of other startups start to attack these fields. I think logistics as well. I think education. I think a lot of the fundamental processes that you use to run the large industries have been changed by technology.
And do you think when you say the fundamental processes are changing, is this a common force across all industries at the same time, so the cloud, etc., or is there something that's made government and finance maybe more in play than they were before?
Well, I think what's happened is what's possible with technology and with data has changed a lot in the last 20 years, and that's only been accelerating. And the places where it changes first are probably the less regulated places. So if something's possible to do differently, there's a question of what are the barriers, and there's very few barriers in the consumer space. There's a lot of barriers in these other spaces, but as the gap grows and grows, it becomes obvious there's something wrong with this space and that it needs to change, and people are pushing hard to do that. And you're starting to see a lot of big waves being made where everyone's kind of lining up and realizing, yes, we need to fix how this thing works.
So there's a lot of debate about whether Silicon Valley can figure out those industries that are regulated because they have a whole different ecosystem around them and so forth. And I guess you've got the Uber model of just challenging the regulators very in their faces, and then you've got, I guess you've been involved in things like lobbying through Forward US in Washington to try and change the immigration laws and so forth. But how do you think Silicon Valley is doing in figuring out how to get the regulatory change to make technology able to disrupt government?
Well, I think first of all, most of these industries are always changed by outsiders, and so I think Silicon Valley is in a good position as anyone else to change them. And when it comes to regulations, that is a really good point. The actual thing that happens a lot behind the scenes is the big companies you're disrupting are much better friends with the government than you are, and are oftentimes changing things against you to try to stop you. I think there's a sense of inevitability where things are going to the cloud, things are going to be data driven. You are going to cut out a lot of the middlemen, for example, in finance, and it's kind of like a losing battle where they are trying to change regulations against you. But every year we kind of make progress and are fixing things more and more.
But do you think the Uber strategy is a good one of just setting up and challenging the regulators?
I think Travis is awesome, and he has a lot of. I think because he has so many consumers on his side, it might actually work. I think for most of the industries I've worked in, you have to be a little bit more careful because there's no groundswell of people helping you out. So maybe we're a little bit more cautious probably with the companies that I've built.
Because you take finance, and certainly in America, the regulatory environment is really hostile to say setting up a new bank. You've seen a lot of skepticism about Bitcoin and so forth. What's...
No, exactly. If you want to do something new and revolutionary in finance, you have to first hire an army of lawyers and spend $10 or $15 million. And that's because the people who are in charge in finance have created these regulations to make it really hard. But I think, at the same time, if you want to do something in the cloud, suddenly, FINRA might say, oh, it's not safe for it to be in the cloud, and that's because they're friends with the other providers who are going to lose the business. And so there are a lot of these challenges. But I do think you are seeing us win a lot. I think what my friends did with the Jobs Act, for example, was kind of a counteraction against that, and they've had some great success starting to change some of the rules in the right direction.
So, there's been a lot of skepticism about Silicon Valley's efforts to influence Washington, particularly forward US and the attempt to change the immigration laws. And people have, I think, seen that you found it harder than maybe disrupting non-regulated industries. I mean, what's your reflection so far on how that effort has gone and what you've learned from it and where it might go in future?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been a supporter of forward.us for a while, along with a lot of my friends, and I think they have actually successfully shifted the conversation. I think it really was key to getting it through the Senate, and it's unfortunate we didn't get it through the House, but my understanding is we might actually try again after the lame duck session, and they still could go further. I mean, I think there's definitely some Silicon Valley practical logic that has pushed it somewhat, and I guess the jury's out, and we'll see if we can do it next year. But I mean, it's clearly an issue for everyone in America who's working on technology.
And the elections in America that happened yesterday and on Tuesday and saw the Republicans seizing control of the Senate, I mean, now you've got real gridlock for the next 2 years in Washington. Do you think that's going to be good for innovation or bad for innovation? And
I mean, I think there's actually a lot of issues right now in America that aren't left versus right issues. They're kind of like common sense versus extreme crazy people issues. And frankly, there's people on both the far left and the far right who, for example, were stopping the immigration stuff from happening. And I think it's definitely possible for smart people in both parties to work together. And I know a lot of people on both sides who still want to see this happen. So I'm actually cautiously optimistic we can do a few things with immigration next year. We'll see what we're able to do.
Palantir is a company that you helped found and you're still a major shareholder in. And it's a company I think people have a lot of questions about. It's associated with big data and analytics and does a lot of government contracts. And so some people are saying, well, is this Big Brother in some way? I mean, what's your sense of how that's going to play out and what your strategy is, to what extent you are helping the government in that way?
So about a third of Palantir's business now, it works with about 20 global governments. And actually what Palantir does is it teaches businesses and governments how to use their data appropriately and how to collaborate in ways that are legal and how to get the best use of the data within the confines of civil liberties. So a lot of what we were worried about after 9/11 was the government not being very good at technology and being desperate to find ways of using the data to stop the bad guys. And so they would constantly break the rules. And what we realized is that with better technology, you could both help them use the data better while making it really clear what the rules are and making sure they stay constrained. So actually, a lot of people come to Palantir to be taught about civil liberties and to learn what's possible with regard to civil liberties. That's definitely the ethos of the company.
But there is an emphasis in the company now to try and do less government work or more other kinds of work?
Actually, the government work has still been growing at about 50 to 75% a year the last 3 years. The commercial side's been more than doubling every year. So just by the numbers, the commercial side's now become a bigger part of the company.
And I mean, one of the questions that people have raised about Palantir is the extent to which you're really a tech company, or are you essentially a consulting business? Is there a platform there that's beyond these smart guys that are going out and advising people McKinsey style?
That's a good question. What we did when we founded the company is we looked at about 100 large IT services contracts, and we said, how come this always takes billions of dollars? How come it always goes over budget? How can we create a single product that would productize all of this with 4 main pillars? It's data integration, search, discovery, and analysis, knowledge management, and collaboration. So how can we create a product that does that? And it's not possible to create something that does it 100%, but once we've been in the industry for a while, we get to the point where we're like 95 to 98% productized. And so it's definitely a very good business. It's actually, you probably don't want to be a public company for now because you don't want to maybe show how good of a business it is once you productize these things.
And then after Palantir, you've started looking at finance and solving some problems there. Tell us what you've done so far and what your next step is in that industry.
Sure. So I actually learned a lot about finance because Palantir was doing some large contracts with the banks that were very analogous to the government. But the other thing we realized is there's lots of parts of the ways finance runs that were set up 50 years ago, 100 years ago, that none of us would probably design into finance if we were going to how we make it nowadays. And so I think finance has hundreds of thousands of people manually entering data. It has tons of middlemen all over the world, and most of the money in finance is made from closing deals, not from doing analysis. And if you look at what's possible with all of our systems and technology today, the connecting and closing deals part is actually not what we should be being paid for. You should be paid for thinking. And so that's kind of where finance is going in the next 20 years, is as the data flows more easily, as systems and banks become more open and connected, people are going to get paid more for being smart and less for just running around like fraternity guys and drinking a lot and closing deals. That's not necessarily how it should work. And so I think it's a very positive direction that we're taking it.
So is your goal to kill traditional investment banking?
No, I think our goal is to partner with the banks and help them transition, because the ones that don't transition into the smarter ways of doing things are gonna lose their dominant place. And so I think the smart banks realize this as well. And I think all of them are thinking, how can we leverage technology to make sure we're focused on the parts that matter, not the old-fashioned way of doing things.
But if anything, I mean, the impact of technology on finance generally has been to increase very, very short-term trading, high-speed, high-frequency stuff that basically adds no value to society.
So I tend to agree with you. I think there are some arguments why you want some people doing some high-speed trading for liquidity purposes, but I agree with you. I'm constantly arguing with my friends not to go into high-frequency trading, because I think on the margins, it's very silly compared to all these other parts of finance. We have trillions of dollars in the mortgage-backed security industry that's badly allocated, that's badly understood. We have these other huge parts of finance, and there's very few top young engineers going into them, and you have tons of these young engineers going into high-frequency trading, which is a great source of frustration for me. But I think there are a lot of areas where there should be platforms, and there will be platforms that are going to make finance work better.
You've talked a lot about healthcare and how we can solve the big health problems that the world faces. Where are you most optimistic about delivering some pretty rapid change over the next 10 years?
I'm actually most optimistic about the part that controls the system in America. So in America, we've decided, for better or worse, both parties agreed that insurance companies run our system. And there's about $1 trillion of market cap within the insurance companies. And if you look at how these companies run, it's actually really stupid. It's a lot of manual stuff and fax machines and not clear where the data is flowing. There's lots of wasted money. Like, certain procedures will cost 3 times as much as others but have the same results. So the guys administering healthcare are not using technology well, and this is an area that a lot of people are working on. I'm an investor in a new insurance company called Oscar in New York, which I'm very bullish on. Palantir also works closely with a lot of the biggest players, and it's helping them. So I think if you improve the insurance system itself, then everything else that sits on top of that's going to work better.
And what about solving, some of these big challenges like, death and things of that kind? Are you optimistic that we're going to live to be 200 or live to be 500?
My very favorite people in Silicon Valley are working on solving death and taxes. I think those two would be great to solve. I'm not optimistic myself that I'm going to live forever, but I have friends who are, so I hope they're right.
And I guess, are you optimistic about getting rid of taxes?
There's a lot of us who would like to start new nations, but that's a tough one. On the healthcare side, the thing that is really exciting is a lot of these problems that were purely biology problems before are becoming IT problems. And so we do have a lot of our smartest friends starting to work on healthcare from an information technology perspective. Even cancer is becoming an IT problem. So I do think there's a lot of progress being made pretty quickly.
So if you've got a room full of people in the tech industry, if you could recommend one area that they should focus on because you think it would not just make them a lot of money but also improve the state of the world the biggest and the most, what would that be?
I think that's a really good question. I think we're in an interesting time in technology where it happens to be that the things that make you the most money are also the things that are solving the biggest problems. And so if you look at, there's really, I think, 4 or 5 areas of the world where if you solve any of these problems by making them work better, the whole world works better. I think fixing government, fixing finance, fixing healthcare, fixing education, these are all problems where if we solve them, we all benefit, and there's also probably a huge amount of money to be made. So I think it's really cool that those two are aligned, and those are things we can all work on together.
Well, Joe Lansdale, thank you very much for talking with us today.
Thank you, Matthew.